although I'm going to be talking mostly about the Boston Red Sox. Boston Red Sox are really kind of part of Fenway Sports Group. And Fenway Sports Group is a broad group of companies. Come on, baby. Looks a little like this. You obviously familiar with the Red Sox. Play at Fenway Park, been around since 1912. Fenway Park has. We've been around longer. Fenway Sports Management is sort of the management arm across all these other businesses and things. It includes kind of the management of like LeBron James and a lot of other companies and actually technologies as well. We kind of have a real estate group that's doing a lot of work. I think, are you guys aware that we're kind of launching a music hall? So Fenway Music Hall is about a 5,400 seat arena that we're going to launch in fall of this year. So kind of working on it sort of during COVID. It would have launched sooner, but as COVID goes. Nesson, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, New England Cable Sports, type of thing. Roush Fenway actually has a new name now, but Roush Fenway Racing, obviously a racing arm, kind of Formula Series. Liverpool football, and then most recently back in January, our ownership group bought the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then obviously this is John Henry, who is a principal owner. And so this kind of represents sort of the universe of the companies that we kind of represent. Obviously, you can imagine there's technology that supports all of these. Valuation wise, it's probably close to a $10 billion business type of thing. So, and we have ownership organization that's, as you can see with the Penguins, that's actively looking for new sports franchises that we can kind of leverage. So this is a little bit of sort of our universe. What I'm going to talk about today is specifically a little bit about the Red Sox and most focused on sort of our data, our architecture of our data, and our focus a little bit on the fan experience type of thing. By the way, I'm going to try to go through that at a relatively brisk pace, just so that I'm here to answer any other questions you have. Like, I know some of you guys are doing Python. Happy to talk to you guys about sort of what other people are doing in the field that I'm seeing, what we're doing. I belong to another group here in town called Boston CIO, when there's about 100 of us. So that kind of represents about the 100 of the largest companies in New England. And so we also talk quite a bit about sort of technology and things like that in terms of what we're looking for in students and other sort of things. So happy to share any of those things if if you guys are interested. So I'll kind of dive in. If you've got questions, if you're okay with it, feel free to ask them as I get into it. I'm more than happy to answer any. For those who are at home, feel free to kind of jump in here as well. I'm happy to sort of take any calls you have. Why is this not? There it goes. First thing is to kind of point out, one of the things for us, these statistics actually came way back in 2012, but they're pretty similar, which is roughly 2/3 of New Englanders consider themselves Red Sox fans. It's kind of a big deal because for us, one of the challenges has historically been, how do I understand those fans? How do I, how do we reach those fans? And how do we effectively kind of even know who they are? And as you can imagine, kind of like going to a movie, not everybody some people buy a ticket and they just got to go to movies. Some people sign up for, AMC rewards or other sort of things and kind of identify themselves. And so the challenge for us oftentimes is we really aspire to kind of know who all of you are that are going to games so that we can create a much more personalized experience. We're doing a lot more work in terms of like refining mobile applications and other sort of capabilities, really all around sort of like personalization is what we really kind of aspire to. And when I kind of mentioned before about sort of also having this real estate part of our business, it's been publicly acknowledged that like we're going to be developing another 2 million square feet around Fenway. So this September, we're opening the Fenway Music Hall. Again, it's a 5,000 seat kind of music hall type of thing. We're also going to start doing like mixed use kind of around it. So you're going to find Fenway Park's going to look a lot more in the future like Faneuil Hall, kind of around Fenway. So it's going to be much more of a venue destination. And if you've kind of been to other locations like Atlanta or even Chicago more recently, or Texas and others, you're kind of noticing that like all the sporting venues are becoming like destinations, right? And so this is kind of a trend. So like for us, what we really want to do, and the reason why data and personalization is so important is we want to be able to kind of create a more personalized experience for you as you kind of move around different properties and take advantage of different services. One of the challenges we have, however, in this world, like a lot of companies, is there's like a lot of middlemen in the process. So it sounds kind of easy to get your arms around data. It's not always that easy. Like, I mean, some things are pretty obvious, in terms of like, you're physically buying something. But the challenge in sports oftentimes is like there's a lot of middlemen. Typically parking we own some parking, but most of the parking we don't own. Like, you know, concessions, like we have a concessionaire partner, merchandise, we have a merchandise partner, all these different things. We've got, you can buy tickets on the secondary market, things like that. So for us, big challenge historically was how do we get our arms around all this discrete, you know, information, both structured and kind of unstructured, you know? So, you know, if you think about a family, a typical family comes to Fenway 1-2 times a year, you know, in New England on average. You know, and the challenge again for us is how do we understand all of these plus many more? So there's some 50 touch points that we keep track of right now regarding fan behavior. And so like, whether it's the simple things like, oh, we bought a ticket, or what gate do people scan tickets at, or what gates do they go through, or where they're sitting, and, you know, do they buy merchandise or other sort of things, you know, do they consume television services like Nessun? Do they do other sort of things? So all these different things combined to basically try to like form a bit of a pattern for us so that we can try to create a more targeted, more focused kind of outreach to all you. You know, and this, you know, it's funny. I remember putting a slide together years ago and I just happened to see it, so I threw it in. But like, this thing was like, we had a 2022 goal. I think I did this like 5 years ago, which is kind of funny, but like, and the goal was to kind of know almost everyone that went into a ballpark, right? We're not going to achieve that goal, but we're exponentially closer than we ever have been. And so things I'm going to talk about, like in COVID, interestingly enough, actually kind of accelerated that in many ways. And that, you know, we kind of moved to digital ticketing. Like, call me like a bit of a doubting Thomas here, but like, I was kind of concerned that digital ticketing would never happen at Fenway almost, because one of the challenges that we have is, unlike a lot of the clubs, like we have a challenge in trying to blend kind of nostalgia and sort of the whole sort of uniqueness of going to a ball game at Fenway Park, you know, this 1912 ballpark type of thing. And a lot of people are, you know, say things as collectibles and memorabilia and things like that. And so we get a lot of pushback sometimes historically. We try to like automate ticketing and things like that, make you use your phone. COVID kind of accelerated all that because it just required us to kind of move to a model that was less hands-on with things. And so we started looking at all these different challenges we have. And I'm going to tell you our journey, because I think it's important because every organization probably goes through a similar journey as this. And it's just something to think about, because I think sometimes as technologists, we have a tendency to kind of focus on sort of, you know, like, you know, I know Java, or I know SQL, or I know a certain technology. And the most important thing I tell my group, any of the companies that I've worked at, is like, you're a business person first, and you're kind of a technologist second, you know. And I think too often technology people kind of lose track of all that, right? You've got a certain domain skill, but that skill is exponentially more valuable when you really understand your business, how your business makes money, like who your competition is, you know, like which things, you know, if I'm going to work on technologies, which ones drive like maybe employee productivity or competitive advantage and other sort of things. And so having a broader understanding of those things. I know when you first go into a job, sometimes you're like heads down and you're like, you know, you're just trying to like not get fired. You're like, I want to do a good job, you know, learn technology and things. But I encourage you to kind of broaden your sphere of influence and kind of do some outreach. When we look back, and this is, by the way, going back with a lens of about 2 to 3 years, we looked at a lot of our problems. We had data consistency problems. You know, we had some folks, because we generated a lot of reporting, who might look at, you know, who looked at a lot of our data and said, hey, like, we should do more reporting, and we should be able to help people do, you know, double click on the thing and drill downs and stuff like that. And I remember telling somebody, I said, you know, if we frankly did that right now, it'd be like if you traveled on Delta and you were a freaking flyer, you know, traveler. I'd be telling you about 3 flights you never took, and I wouldn't have 2 flights that you did take. And the data quality historically was hugely problematic. And so a lot of that we've cleaned up over 3 years and a lot of effort. You know, historically, I was in this system, and like tickets.com system 16 times. I'd be like, you know, Brian Shield, B Shield, Brian Shield spelled wrong, Brian Shields, you know, like, I mean, just chronically, you know, problems. And so we've rectified 98% of those type of things. We still put a lot of focus on data quality, but that was kind of a challenge for us. We had storage issues, we had lack of centralized access, and we had a lot of inefficiencies. And I won't bore you to death on all those, but, you know, what we did was we kind of turned these things into a model of like, where do we see business opportunity? You know, so we took a look, we've done a lot with like machine learning, you know, all of our data, we effectively the last 2 years, we moved to Google. So Google is our primary data store for all fan related data. At the same time, by the way, since some of you are software developers as well, you know, we kind of took an environment that historically was very Microsoft centric, very C#.NET kind of oriented, moved to like Python, Django, Vue.js, Angular, a number of other things too. And so we kind of did these kind of in parallel, if you will. We kind of really kind of doubled down on sort of our analytics. We're a Tableau and reporting environment. I'll tell you more about this 360 view of the fan, and obviously there's lots of technology optimizations. The other thing is, if you're a data focused kind of person, and you're thinking about fan related data, the other thing you really need to understand a bit more, just in the world that we're living in right now, is around data privacy. Data privacy for people like me, because it's still relatively new, and even when GDPR came out, data privacy is still like really kind of in its infancy in some ways. And the challenge, however, though, is that almost any organization you're going to go to, the systems were designed originally where that was not top of mind. And so one of the real problems that we all face kind of things is, if you call up and say, hey, I'd like to have my data removed from your systems, like you might think of that like, oh, geez, I'm going to go like, John Smith, I'm going to take John Smith out of the system, or I'm going to anonymize John Smith. But trying to ripple those through systems that weren't designed with that in mind is hugely problematic. One of the inherent real benefits of kind of doing a complete redo from our whole data architecture is that everything was designed with data privacy in mind. So that if someone asks me where we have data, I can tell them instantly. If someone says, hey, can you get rid of my data or anonymize my data, we can kind of do those things and things like that. So anyways, there's inherent benefits. The key there is, if you're going to rewrite something, get your arms around the long-term benefits that you can kind of bundle into that architecture. Sometimes you have to kind of like design for the future, but build for today. But so the point sort of is design the architecture so that it's scalable and all those other kinds of things, but it's also a little bit future-proofed as best as you can kind of predict where things are going. These are just some of the other things that we're looking at in terms of like how we could drive sort of both, revenue and other sort of enablements, with a greater optimization and a focus on sort of different things. This is how we, in our organization, we created a series of business use cases, and we kind of looked at those and thought like, which ones are complicated, which ones can we get done relatively, which ones have the biggest business impact. And so this became a bit of basically sort of our bullseye for how we started to do certain things around sort of machine learning and automation and things like that. And so this is like a journey that I think almost every company hopefully should go through as they're thinking about this. It's much more than how do I store my data, how do I design my SQL or my relational databases. It's a lot more about sort of like, what's the end game? Like, what do we aspire to do with this data? And then how do we back into the architecture elements? Then we kind of developed sort of what I'll call the future state. Like, so what are the target outcomes from what we aspire to do here? So in our case, things like improving efficiencies, increasing sales, optimizing spend, improving insights, reducing risk, and aligning with Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball, because there's 30 Major League Baseball clubs, and Major League Baseball, as you can imagine, Major League Baseball also owns tickets.com. And so for us, aligning with MLB and kind of ensuring that we're as synced up as humanly possible is a big deal. So MLB moved to Google just 2 months before we did. So when they made that migration, we saw it as a good opportunity. We still do AWS. We're kind of a hybrid like most companies. We do some work on prem still. We do AWS. We don't do too much in Azure, but Google and AWS are still very active. A lot of the AWS stuff we still do with baseball analytics as well. So whoops, let me go back in here. So we designed this is sort of super, I won't get into weeds on this, but at a macro level, we kind of designed an architecture that we believe could sort of build out this model of a single view of a fan. So for us and for every company that's kind of in the sort of space that we are, a services space, the whole challenge sort of is like, how do you design an architecture and be able to kind of enable sort of all the collection points and aggregation points and things that allow you to basically to understand any one patron, so I understand sort of how they use all these different myriad of services that we provide or third parties provide and things. And so this is just, so obviously these are like external data sources on the left. We probably have about 65 or 70 of these sources kind of coming in. We also kind of store a lot of this in GCP, Google Cloud Platform. We architect everything sort of in a design model within GCP and BigQuery, so that we can understand sort of a single view of fan. We also kind of make sure we understand sort of data privacy capabilities. We have the ability to be able to support AI and ML capabilities in this model. And I'll show you a better picture of this. And then I don't really show it too much here, but one thing that's critically important, especially at the fan level, is we also kind of took, just before COVID became a reality, back in sort of late 2019, we were doing our budgets, and we made a strategic decision to kind of move to Google as our architecture, to kind of put money behind sort of this design, and to also kind of move like 100% of our company to Salesforce. And so we kind of implemented phase one of that in July of 2020. And it really kind of set the stage for our super long-term success. We were really, really fortuitous, because candidly, had we not put that in the budget back in 19, I don't know where we'd be right now in some respects, especially with COVID hitting. And so for us, everything I just kind of showed you is sort of a means to an end, right? In other words, we kind of went through a journey, right? Like we try to figure out where we have problems, how we can design for the future, how we build an architecture, find the right partners, and all those things, a lot of complexity and all that. And then at the end of the day, it's kind of like, how do you leverage that data? And so I'm going to show you some examples of what we're doing with that data now that we've this architecture, that we've been doing it for about 2 years. So for us, the challenge is this. So one of our challenges, right, is like sales and marketing. So like, how do we touch all of you? Like, how do we do outreach to fans and things like that? How do we sell tickets and all these kind of things? So based on that technology architecture I sort of shared with you, these three sort of pillars, if you will, data analytics, marketing, creative services, and ticket sales, is sort of like the holy grail for what we really focus on relative to fan level data. So I'll start with the first one here. It's interesting doing this one. Okay, this is a little bit kind of a more like high level view of what I just showed you a moment ago. Again, data sources on the left, Google BigQuery kind of in the center, where all of our data is effectively stored. On the right-hand side, these are just sort of internal application type of things that my department focuses on, whether it's internal application development in Python, Django, Vue.js, Angular, et cetera, type of thing, whether it's data privacy, Tableau reporting, Salesforce, analytics, some compliance issues that we have to deal with, machine learning, and obviously DevOps capabilities. These are things that kind of effectively sort of fuel all this on a daily basis type of thing. So these are all services that we effectively provide. And then lastly, it's at this part down here, all of our outbound activities around engaging with fans go through MLB, Major League Baseball. So we have a very integrated relationship with them in terms of how we basically provide content. But the key thing here, though, is really, as I said before, is kind of like designing with the end in mind. Like this vision, by the way, when we built this, the first version, as I said before, kind of went into production in July of 2020. Today, there are 8 other clubs. So we shared our work with other MLB clubs, even the Yankees. And so really any other MLB club that wants to leverage this model can do so. And so today there's another 8 clubs with probably another 5 or 6 joining on that'll leverage almost the same exact architecture that we built type of thing. And really in this particular case, the reason really in my mind is that everything we're doing right now is not a competitive advantage, right? I'm not trying to win more games than the Yankees or somebody else. This is not going to like win games. This is going to sort of build better relationships with fans, help you sell tickets. It's going to help you sort of cultivate a long-term relationship and things. And so if other clubs can benefit from those same capabilities, like why not? So it's a very different industry. You typically think of the industry as like, you guys leave here and get a job in the financial services industry, you tend to think of like other financial services businesses as being your competitors, and they are. And I worked in that industry for like 7 or 8 years. So I totally understand that. Sports is a little bit different. Like we compete on the field, but we don't compete for fans. It's not that often that a fan kind of wakes up and decides one day to become a Red Sox fan, other than this gentleman after we were all done. But so it's a challenge, right? But it's also kind of a great opportunity. My goal here, at the end of the day, is that all this work that we've done to kind of like lay the foundation for what could happen in other sports and things. My hope is that everybody else will help advance the technology, and that we kind of leverage this a little bit more like like an open source model in some respects, so that people kind of contribute back to the model, if you will. And so I'm actually going to be in Pittsburgh tomorrow, chatting with the Penguins about something similar. About how we can sort of get onto a model here where we can all sort of start to like leverage some of the same tools and technology and things like that. So you're starting to see a lot more synergies, both within sports capabilities like LBE, as well as across different sports genres. For us, oops, did that go twice? Let's see. For us, so part of the challenge is understanding sort of, so we have the audience tool builder things that allow us to say, if we're working with sales and sales needs to kind of do an outbound sales campaign to all of you or something for, you guys familiar with like student nines, like sort of major Red Sox? So like we might do something that said, hey, I want to know all college students that are in the area that are over a certain age, maybe, probably not that one, but, and we like would circle some, says, tell me everyone who's kind of within a, like a 50-mile radius of Boston type of thing. And we might do a campaign directly to, the individuals in our database that we kind of maintain on those things. And so we've developed all these different audience tools to simplify these processes. We also introduce a lot of machine learning and other sort of things in this as well. So like we start to learn more about, like I generate a campaign, we run the campaign, we assess the success of it. We looked at who maybe kind of, which elements of that were more successful than others, type of thing. And then we sort of refine the campaign. It's a lot like kind of when I was at the Weather Channel, we did the same thing. So for those that kind of are interested in data, like I'll just take a Weather Channel example, but it applies a lot, so universally that, we want to automate forecasts for the globe, right? That's really hard to do with a bunch of human beings, right? So we obviously automated the whole forecasting process. But what we did before that is we would, just before we published those results, we would give like a meteorologist the ability to kind of like touch forecasts. And what they would typically do is just touch forecasts in areas where there might be severe weather activity. And as the machines get smarter, so a forecast for a given point, I would say, what's the forecast for Waltham, Massachusetts? We would predict it's going to be 57 degrees and not raining or something. And it turns out it's 59 degrees and it is raining. And what we do is we look at all of our models and say, which model would predicted that? And so it's a constant learning model. So these kind of go through the same processes too. So as you're learning technology, think of this is kind of an opportunity to kind of like grow in the sense of like, how is my work going to be leveraged kind of going forward? Because it's especially with machine learning capabilities, things are really changing dynamically. I won't take you through this thing, but bottom line is we use Salesforce as a tool to kind of help understand a lot of this. This really kind of becomes the dashboard for how we work with, season ticket holders or other ticket holders like yourselves if you're going to games and stuff. So what we typically do is we take all that data, at least the ones that are relevant, and we make it available to, representatives and things like that. So when they're talking to you, they can say, oh yeah, you guys, we just went to a game the other day, didn't you? That's cool. Like, oh, I saw your olds at the concert. Oh, hey, by the way, Zach Brown's coming back this summer if you're interested in getting tickets and stuff. So we're kind of making people much wiser, than they historically have been about sort of understanding kind of fan behavior and things. But all that data at the end of the day, what we kind of do is we learn different behaviors. So all you guys would fit over here, so like we basically create personas, right? So these 9 personas we kind of leverage, and we basically think about how do they touch fans, and how do we basically target, the behavior across the different kinds of games that we have. And how do we basically know when we do campaigns, which ones are going to reach out to which ones? And all this is predicated on this whole data architecture that we built with kind of forward-leaning kind of mindset. We also do things like dynamic ticket pricing, so that if you're going to a Yankees game, it's more expensive than going to an Oakland A's game, type of thing. What it does is it kind of raises the average price relative to us kind of, type of thing. It's kind of a, I don't know. I look at this like a little dual-edged sword, but it sort of, it's like almost everything else nowadays. Everything's kind of demand pricing, depending on what you're doing, and obviously venues that you go to now are operating sort of a similar model. At the end of the day, armed with all that good data, we have the ability to do relatively kind of different things. So we can now target campaigns. So the campaign that we would send to you guys would be very different than the whoops, that's an active screen. Sorry. You still see okay on that one? Yeah. The campaign that we would basically provide is quite different than, what you might get sort of at my house, with I still have one young daughter at home type of thing. And so what we now do is we marry up outbound capabilities with sort of how we do marketing, with kind of unique data elements, things like that, to basically create capabilities that never existed before. And the result of all that, by the way, is a pretty dramatic growth in how we leverage our ad spend. So we're making people more efficient. We're making our advertisers, our marketing folks, much more capable than they've ever been before. And these are all enabled by just having better data, being able to kind of leverage those through our analytics team, who does an amazing job of really being able to kind of apply these kinds of concepts. Evolution of marketing. So you can see like what it also means is that now that people see it as being highly successful, they're like, oh, let's double down on this, right? So even 2021 was these two, obviously 19 was a pretty normal, I'm skipping 20. 19 was a normal year for us. 2021 was actually started off anyways, as you guys know, it was kind of a mixed year with COVID at the beginning, the first few months. And yet, despite that, you can see the astronomical growth of now that we've been able to basically sort of unleash the effectiveness of our marketing folks and our analytics team in terms of what they've been able to enable, kind of armed with this new capabilities. Same type of thing here. I think, let me see. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Let me get this way. Oh, baby. Am I going the wrong way? I ain't going the wrong way. Sorry about that. At the end of the day, what it translates also into from a sales standpoint is, how do we translate leads into effective leads, into sales opportunities, into dollars? And for us, this pyramid, if you will, this funnel allows us to be exponentially more efficient than we have been historically, type of thing. So it gives you a sense of the art of the possible here a little bit in terms of what we can do. It also, for season ticket holders and others, it allows us to kind of enable new capabilities that we didn't have before. And I can talk a lot about those things. So I spent a lot of my time on fan engagement capabilities, whether it's mobile development or facial recognition type of thing, or kind of you name it. Like that world's changing exponentially. So in the not too distant future, we tested this in the playoffs last year, but in the not too distant future, you'll come in if you opt into facial recognition, which is almost, by the way, no different than almost authenticating your iPhone, right? So I do facial recognition. I say, yep, that's Brian, type of thing. I come into a game, it'll auto recognize you. It'll see if you've got a ticket to the game and you can kind of pass through. Early tests on that is that we can basically have about 60 people a minute kind of go through and be verified, which is exponentially faster than you can imagine the old days where it's like, okay, like here's my ticket and someone's like, looking for it and it's in their wife's, pocketbook or whatever, and they're looking for it and all these different things. And so facial recognition has kind of come a real long way. So the other thing that they're also working on now with some of our concession partners is if you do the same type of thing, they'll do auto facial recognition even if they're going to buy a beer. So it's really sort of fundamentally changing. We do mobile food ordering, now in a lot of different places within Fenway, not everywhere. Partly, it's really more of a function of the fact that we're kind of a smaller ballpark and don't have access to some other things. But what it means, though, all these things, all this data I'm talking about, the data fundamentally is the foundation upon which all these services are effectively built. And so whether it's season ticket holders or it's all of you guys, maybe taking part of the season 9 thing, all these things are only kind of enabled because the technology kind of drives its capabilities. So student 9 is just because I noticed we talking to you guys. Even the student 9 thing, understanding the data allows us to like exponentially drive much greater value in kind of our student 9's program because we can, right? So we now for the first time can actually say, if I'm trying to send something to Peter, I know it's Peter now, and I can start to say, hey, Peter, or yourself, I know you're a Yankees fan, so maybe I might send you, a little bit more targeted Yankees information, things like that, or maybe not, but it's so anyways, you kind of get the concept of it. Demographics, we understand things a lot better now too, like what percentage of people, what typically age group is it, how many people have EDU addresses, other sort of things. All this information is collected, and in our world, it all kind of, most of it comes down to like we're doing surveys right now, and we're asking like your age groups, kind of like, what capabilities do you want in the ballpark? And we're getting things, I want more mobile food ordering. I want more mobile services. I want to be able to kind of, do things with my phone. I want to be able to get like, pregame audio and video things with Alex Cora, all these different things. So all these things are now that we're going to start offering them out there. So so one of the wonderful things that's been unlocked with all this is that, and I think, and Frank, a little bit with COVID, is that COVID kind of introduced this almost like the art of the possible a little bit more. Like it kind of gave you the ability, because you didn't have as many fans in the stands, to kind of like test things that I think historically were kind of off limits. It was people had a lot of sort of preconceived notions. I think especially in sports where things go back, years and years and years. It's like we've always done it this way. And so it's opening people's minds to the art of the possible and kind of what kinds of things that we can effectively do. Oops, wrong way. So, let me talk more a little bit about sort of before we can get into questions if you like, but let me tell you a couple other things I was thinking about. So fan engagement. So if you're doing, design work and software things, the, as I said before, we're big Python's users. So it sounds like that's a pretty common skill set here, which is great, by the way. I heard a couple of people mention SQL. How many people are doing like data or are focused more on data versus sort of software development and things like that? Okay. If you're, on the data side, what I tell students a lot is, I would say the students that I'm seeing now who graduate with degrees, a little bit more focused on data, are exponentially better in the last couple of years than they were 5 years ago. I mean, 5 years ago, they might have been a major in some places, but it wasn't really well understood, and if I were just giving you a little bit of a list, besides sort of some of the things that I'm sure like you're learning in your classes and things like that, I mean, get exposure to some of the other tools that surround this. Like Tableau is just, I'm sure you use Microsoft. I don't guess you guys have different reporting tools to use here in particular. Do you guys have any reporting tools that, the students gain knowledge of or anything like that?
Using Tableau.
Okay. Did you learn here on your own, or is it?
Yeah, there's a CS 160 here. It's a class.
Those, by the way, all right, true story. Like we had someone in our group wanted to be a developer, didn't really have all the skills to be an effective developer, became more of a reporting analyst. And I would say that person's salary has, I'd say more than doubled in 4 years. And all they do is Tableau. It's like, it's amazing. Like when I look back and I think to myself, oh my God, I can make that kind of money writing reports. Like I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Now, if you're going to be, so I bring it up only in that, even if you're a data person and maybe you don't want to do reporting, that wasn't my bag, but at least develop a working knowledge of these things. It's really super valuable. And it's a big differentiator kind of in your careers as well, when you, especially those first early, jobs. Somebody mentioned SQL. Like you really have to have a relational database knowledge mindset, if you go into these things. I think too often I see folks who are a little bit weak there, and it's kind of an Achilles heel. Whether you're a developer or you're a data person, you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to write the most complex SQL in the world, but you need to have kind of a working understanding of these things. And typically, by the way, if you're on the data side, like the way we do it is we're not expecting you to be experts in a lot of these things. We're expecting you to have working knowledge. And then what also happens is we're not even expecting, if you're doing data analytics and data science, we're not expecting that you're going to have super depth of knowledge of data tools, because we'll have a DBA do that for you. What we will do is we'll expose data to you, but you're going to have to kind of understand certain elements, because the most important thing is to allow all of you to kind of work kind of as independently as you can, right? So for us, it's kind of about an enablement, really. And so those are important skills. On the software development side, that wasn't even like, I think it's almost a little bit harder. It's kind of where I spent most of my career and still spend a lot of my time. It's like, I think on the software development side, it's harder in the sense that it's a little bit of tool de jour, right? Like, and I remember addressing my team when I first got to the Weather Channel, and and somebody was complaining about something changing. And I said, wow, like if you chose technology as a field and you don't like change, like you made a huge mistake, like you should just like get out now, because if you're not like someone who wants to be a lifelong learner, you're really going to be frustrated. It's just because the pace is changing so quickly, and if you're kind of a learning person, you just kind of go with the flow. Like companies now are so much better than they used to be. It used to be like, I'd come in, I know C, they say, oh yeah, we're moving to like C#, or we're moving to something totally different, or we're going to move to Power Builder back in the day, right? And you're like, oh my God, like it's a radical shift, But once you get into it, if you're really a sophisticated software developer, it's really kind of just syntax, right? You sort of become familiar with the different syntax and things, but also companies are really aware of all these things. And the one thing that we do so much better than we used to is anytime we're pivoting and we're looking at new technology, like our pivot, by the way, from SQL Server to Google was a major pivot. Like if you're a data person doing Microsoft SQL Server and I don't know, writing SSIS jobs and doing other sort of things for, a living, and someone goes, oh, go do Google. that's like a big, big ask. It's not a trivial thing. But the one thing that I think organizations get much better at is giving you mentors and giving you like programs and giving you sort of experts who can work with you on your projects and things. So you're not, this is meant to be like a fear factor thing. It's sort of just a reality check that the reality is that things do move at a very brisk pace. And, and I think people expect sort of that folks are going to move along. And the ones that do move along quickest are the ones that typically tend to be like more successful, if you will. Let me pause. I feel like I've been chatting for a while now. Questions from any of you guys, either about sort of things that we're doing at the Red Sox? Like, I'd happy to talk about the baseball side too, if that's of interest to you, or if you have any kind of career questions, if you guys are a little bit further along. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's better to have working knowledge of different software, but do you think there's difference between different roles? Like you mentioned data analytics, and they're mainly writing the report and dashboard. What about the more data engineer side and data science?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. So, I mean, everything's changing, but like, it depends what you're doing, what the company's doing. Like in our organization, like understanding R is like helpful, it's still kind of remarkable, but a lot of work is it's done in spreadsheets, and I don't say it negatively. It's just, it's kind of the tool of trade. The problem a little bit, and this kind of came up in some of our baseball sides, is that we used to be so dependent on spreadsheets that somebody would do all this analysis. Somebody might say like, hey, we might want to trade for an outfielder. Like, so we're looking for an outfielder with the following characteristics, has a certain salary range, blah, blah, blah. Like who are candidates for those things? And so you might get some information, but now they want to apply like 12 other filters to that information, right? Historically, people would put all that content into like spreadsheets. They'd run through it and they would give it to like, say like, the GM and go, here's my findings. And then the person would go like, hey, that's great. Yeah. Can you do me a favor? I'd like to know who's had some severe injuries. And the analyst would be like, oh, redo, right? And so we're getting a lot smarter at these things. So we're building a lot more of the capabilities so that it's not so, manually dependent. I would encourage you to like develop at least a working knowledge of machine learning. You can kind of like, I don't know about this room, but like even our own company, we don't have anybody that's an expert in machine learning. Like, I mean, I'll farm out that skill typically, but we know how to do basic machine learning, type of thing. So AutoML with Google, you can do it against spreadsheets. It's not rocket science type of thing, but it does kind of inform you a little bit about like how it works, right? How do you train a system? How do you design your data so that it's more conducive for being sort of, queried and things like that. So again, it's another tool that like if I were going, three of my kids have graduated college now, and one of them was a computer science major. I would tell him all the same things too, and he wanted to go into data privacy and cybersecurity, but same kinds of things. It's like this is kind of a very rapidly kind of changing environment. In fact, one of the things that a lot of my peers and I are doing kind of as part of the Boston CO thing is we're having conversations about like doing more things kind of with colleges like this, where we can kind of share kind of a little bit like if someone told you like, here's what 100 companies in New England are doing, like, it's pretty helpful, like, and here's what we think our roadmap is going to be over the next 5 years, and so we kind of, because frankly, we can't get enough talented resources either, right? So it's a little bit like my example of kind of that open source model, so to speak, which is we see it as an opportunity for all of us, right? All of you as well, but certainly for us selfishly, because you guys represent sort of future employees for us. And so anyway, so there's a lot of things changing, and I think it's a super exciting time to be in technology. Other questions I can answer? Yeah, please.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this in one of my classes, but how Fenway is a landmark, so you can't really physically change the stadium. Has that been a big impediment in the technological advancements you guys have been trying to make?
That's a good question. So Fenway's been there since 1912. Our first game was less than a week from when like the Titanic sank, which is, puts a little context around that. The question sort of looks like, has that impeded our ability to do technology? Yes and no. Like that mobile food ordering is problematic for us. Like it's now that we're like, but who'd have thought of those things, right? But like mobile food ordering is a problem because how many kitchens can you effectively put in there? And how can you put them in close proximity? But we've come up with incredibly creative methods of getting around that. If you go to Fenway this year, like, I don't know if you know, but we built like the trolley deck. So the back end of I could put my pictures up here in this, but like the back end of the music hall is an overlook over like the bleachers now. So if you think about one of the challenges in the bleachers, when I was like your age in film school here, it's like, you had to always go down to get food type of thing. So now you can go up and get food, so there's a bleacher overlook component right there that is a big improvement, from like what we've had historically. So we've tried to work within the footprint of what we can operate. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, it's pretty remarkable because some of the folks that really work on this in our facilities area and our real estate side and things, like they do just amazing work in finding really creative ways of adding more fans and more places and bigger stands and things like that without really changing what we think is sort of like inherently Fenway, and a lot of it, I mean, we just found it. We just recently kind of deployed a brand new sort of wireless capabilities using kind of extreme networks. So Wi-Fi 6, if you guys do that. And so we deployed some 600 or 700 wireless access points around Fenway. And that was the first installation of Wi-Fi 6 in baseball. And but it's a challenge too, I mean, and like we also have cellular service, 5G through Verizon, but there's a lot of complexity. There's like things about like, carrier offloads that now go through Wi-Fi, and we're trying to build more services that consume the Wi-Fi more quickly. We'll start adding more mobile services, more video services to mobile apps and things, which also have an impact. We are adding a lot of IoT kinds of things, so more sensors, more other sort of things, understanding everything from, line wait times to, how different segments of the ballpark are performing. We're deploying new sensors for weather, so that we actually understand sort of the weather kind of inside the ballpark, and how the wind and how the air moves effectively kind of in the ballpark and things like that really kind of affects the path of the ball, how you position players and other sort of things. So there's a lot of science that kind of goes into these things. And there's also, we'll use some of that for broadcast purposes too and things. So, so I think the one thing that's been changed a lot with sports is that there's I'd say in the last, 8 to 10 years, is a dramatic understanding of the role that technology plays in sort of our success, both on the field and, off the field, type of thing. And so there's been a fundamental, replacement of a lot of technology with kind of some of the things that I kind of showed you here and that sort of thing. So, and I think what you're going to see more of is you're going to see more fan facing capabilities. I think in the future, like the way I view like the fan journey is going to be quite different. I think it's going to be, everything's going to be much more geared toward pre-game, during game, post-game, the way I think of it, right? So I'm going to a game and it's like, maybe the day before, it's like, hey, just a reminder of, you get those tickets tomorrow, and it's going to be a little bit, chilly tomorrow, and there's a chance of rain by the 5th inning. So don't forget to bring some different clothes. And oh, by the way, where you are at this time of year, you might want to bring some sunglasses where the sun is, different things. And you kind of say, oh, by the way, do you want to listen to sort of like Alex Cora's, pregame, comments before the game? Oh yeah, I want to hear that. Or you want to hear more about the pitching matchups, and then like, oh, would you like to reserve your parking place? Would you like to order food in advance? So there's so many changes that I think all of us would kind of look at and think, wow, I never thought the day would come, So, but that's all fueled by understanding our data and understanding the technology. And now once you have those things, I can hire a lot of you guys to build apps and stuff that we can do all these kind of creative services on top of. So that's how we think of it.
There's a question that came in from chat.
Yeah.
What kind of job roles do you hire for? Are there more software engineers, developers, or other data science targeted opportunities? And looking at candidates' resumes, what are the things that you actually look for?
Oh, all right. Wow. All right. Just 3 good questions in there. So what do we look for? Well, let me start with kind of, so more recently, if I look at sort of what we're hiring for, like we hire for a little bit of everything, candidly. I mean, I'll just tell you things that are hotter. Cyber. So even though that wasn't one of the questions you asked, like cyber obviously drives a lot of focus for us. On the data side, we're both expanding our data analytics teams, both on the business side and on sort of the baseball side. Those are 2 different groups. We are hiring more developers too. Just hired one the other day. But we're hiring developers, maybe, Python, Django, Angular or React or other sort of things are great skills. I mean, web-based skills and things like that are like hugely valuable right now. I don't see Python changing for a long time, so that would be a good, I'm glad you guys are really learning that one. The, less focus on the DBA role, I would say, like less, like it's not as much about that anymore, as much of it's about what you can do with the data. Yeah, you need a couple geniuses that can like wrap their head around sort of like a lot of complicated data and things like that. But a lot of those things, the way I view sort of our hiring model and sort of our staffing model, it's really like we're a relatively smaller organization compared to other companies I've worked at in the past. Like at the Weather Channel, I think we had 200 developers in our group, right? And so the way I tend to look at it oftentimes is that like at the Red Sox, because we're not staffed as much, like I want us to have expertise up to like a 7 or an 8 in a lot of different skill areas. And then I'll supplement with external input in other areas. Now, in some areas I need 10s, but a lot of other areas I really don't. Like take reporting is a good example we were talking about before. Like we want to have, good skills. We want to be able to do great things, but every so often something super complicated comes by, I'll tap into like a third-party company to do it. And I think that's more commonly the model. It used to be, when I was at the Weather Channel, we kind of owned all of it, but it was almost overwhelming. And sometimes when you had to pivot, you'd find that some of the resources couldn't transition, so to speak. So I would say, go back to the original question, software developers and engineers, I don't differentiate those terms anymore. So I don't really not sure I know what the difference is anymore. They're kind of all the same to me for my last 15 years. We call our developers engineers, here. We develop both kind of internal products and fan-facing services. So, I consider it more kind of an engineering task, so to speak. In baseball, they've been hiring a lot of developers. And in both groups, they're hiring sort of data analytics people. Like the data analytics group didn't exist. Let me think. I got here in 13, which is a good year to get here. When I started in 13, we didn't have a data group, like on the business side. We didn't have anybody that did data as a full-time job, which is like crazy, So anyways, we changed all that. We had no data analytics team up until maybe, maybe like 7 years ago type of thing. We brought in the first Tableau person from some co-op program, type of thing, and then just kind of grew it, So it's all this is changing very, very rapidly. So software development, web-based skills, analytics, really, really important growth area for us type of thing. Cyber, and then operations is growing too. And for us, I think one of the things that we're trying to wrap a little bit of our brain around is that as we continue to acquire more companies, like some element in here, we'll probably get to some discussions about like, are there some element of shared services that makes sense across this? Because you can candidly only have so much expertise, in any of these different fields. And there was the last question, I forgot what the second half of that one was, what skills and.
Peter, what was the part of the question?
Yeah, actually, if I may, if you can hear me.
Peter.
Hi, yeah, thanks for speaking today. Yeah, so Mark kind of summarized it as,
Our volume's not.
oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay?
I think it's something to do with what you look for in resumes.
Oh, yeah, thank you, sorry. I think that one thing I'm encouraging you to do, if you can get some intern positions, that's really valuable. An opportunity to work at any kind of real company, quote unquote, is always valuable. I think, when I look at resumes, I'm kind of looking for some of those different skill sets I just mentioned. We know we're hiring students, so it's not like we're looking for 6 years of experience, right? It's more like that you've got sort of the right skills and the right background and stuff. Most of it we discern. Software development is a little bit easier, candidly, than I think other professions in terms of, because we have so many people in our group, like me and others, that have done this for so long. It's like we're not trying to. I encourage you, like we ask a lot of questions, and we don't give a quiz here. But when I was at the Weather Channel, we had a test that we just gave developers, and I would a lot of times I'd give it to recruiters, and I'd just say, just call me if anybody scores a 9 or above, because we're always hiring, I would use that as one filter. We don't do that so much. I mean, a lot of it's kind of around relationships too. I mean, that's big. I know it might be kind of overstated, but we're also looking for smart students who can sort of learn, who can adapt, who can demonstrate maybe that they've sort of been able to pick up new skills. So those things I was telling you before about, oh yeah, on the side I picked up some Tableau and I learned a little bit of R and I have a working knowledge with, I don't know, Auto ML or other things. All those things look really, really good, by the way, because it looks like someone who's kind of taken their career seriously, as opposed to just sort of like passively a little bit. We look for team players. And I know that's kind of overstated sometimes, but it's a big deal, especially if you're going into a smaller group. A lot of times when I was at the Weather Channel, I didn't matter if you thought you were a hotshot developer. All of our developers there kind of started doing maintenance work, and it's so funny. Some people would be like, oh man, I graduated from Georgia Tech and it's a really good degree and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, you know what, like doing some of the maintenance things is the fastest way to learn because you can look at what other people have done, and so maintenance and QA, you want to write, iOS applications. That was kind of how people started. Typically we're not as sophisticated because we don't have the same scale, but those are some of the things that we would look for, things, for hiring and stuff like that.
Are we running out of time?
We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Can I ask you guys at the back just a little bit?
Yeah, good. I'm sorry. I'll go back to a second.
I think you might be able to answer this quickly, but you said that you work a lot with the fan experience on that side of the Red Sox. Do you do a lot with the baseball side technology?
Yeah, so it's funny. I kind of bounce around. Like, so when I first got to the Red Sox, I spent my first I don't know, 3 years, almost exclusive, not exclusively, but like extensively at least, like on our baseball system. So we wind up replacing, if you were like an old time Red Sox fan here, we used to use an expression like, oh, the Red Sox use Carmine. Carmine was our system of choice. And the gentleman that worked on this, like Tom Tippett, was like a super smart guy. And he developed this over years. He originally wrote like a gaming system, kind of thing. And this was the engine that fueled that. And that kind of became the heart and soul, a little bit of sort of our baseball systems. The problem with it was written so long ago, we wound up having to sort of make modifications to it and change it. And we wanted to make it all mobile based and all these sort of other capabilities. And so we wound up rewriting all of that with a partner here in town. And the new system is called Beacon. And so Beacon is everything now for us, for everything from scouting to player development to, analytics and contract management and kind of, medical sciences and kind of you name it. And so there's a lot of changes going on there. If you think about Moneyball-ish things, Moneyball concepts were very much about player development, I'll call it, like, player performance, I guess, probably a better word. So in other words, like, how can you like get the most out of a player? Like, which player is better to do this? You can look at analytics, assess them, try to figure out which people you might want to sort of bring onto your team, et cetera. And what we kind of are now doing, we think that like sort of the holy grail here is really kind of like where sort of traditional sort of like player development or play analytics kind of things comes in contact with like medical wellness and other sort of things on the medical side. So it's like, how do we, in a lot of it, so we have a lot of effort that goes into the sciences around sort of the player's performance based upon sort of, medical, behavioral, psychological, and other sort of things. So if we're drafting somebody like, and you're a twin, like what makes you more successful than your brother, or how do we differentiate the things, or like what physique, I mean, if you're a scout, I would argue, if you're a scout and you drafted like Roger Clemens, right? You might think, oh, well, the best pitchers are always going to be 6'3", 220, right? And then you'd pass on like Pedro Martinez, right? Because he's, 5'10", 150 or something at the time, and so, so it's much, much more complicated than that. So nowadays, everything from like sleep to diet, to wellness, to eyesight, to reflexes, to certain muscular elements and a whole host of things, all these things are effectively sort of managed and stored and updated on a regular basis. And there's professionals who look at all those things on a regular basis, sleep, if I didn't say sleep, kind of thing. All these things are like a big, big deal. There's something else that's going to tell you right on that too. So analytics. So the analytics it's broader. It's getting more complicated too. The other thing in baseball that's a little bit different is in baseball, you're not allowed to have like wearables. not like traditional wearables, right? So like I can put certain things on you, a sleeve, like a body, things and other things to measure certain things about your performance in practice. I can't use those in a game. And so what organizations have done, and this is a whole nother conversation, by the way, but like what organizations have done is we've really moved to like camera systems. So we have, I don't know what the number is, I'd say over 60, but we have like a tremendous number of cameras focused on every pitcher and batter, right? Every team does. And some teams like us and others have more than others, but we now start to look at things at like 1,000 frames a second, right? So I can look at like me pitching right at Fenway, so to speak, and like, and you can watch my performance and how my mechanics and everything else. So we know everything from, what's the release point, where does it leave your hand, how many RPMs, does the ball have, is it before time it gets to the plate, where does it cross the plate, the X, Y axis, like it kind of like T equals 0 with the ball makes contact with bat, like how good, things that used to be qualitative, like how good of a jump, we get a good jump, well, how good of a jump did you get, like, like the ball went to center field, it took them, 0.2 of a second, is that good or bad, like, and then it was kind of like, what's the path to the ball, is it like, is it a good path, or did he like wander but made some spectacular diving catch? Everyone thinks he's a hero except for the coaching staff, and things like that. So all these things kind of, or stealing bases, all these things that you think like, oh, get a good lead. What's a good lead? Like everything is now rapidly moving to from a qualitative to a quantitative state. You can, your ability to steal a base, you might be only at 60%. But what they find by looking at it is if you can get your lead to, 9.3 inches, you're at 87%. So it starts to make people much more thoughtfully aware of things that they kind of almost took for granted. We all do. I'm sure all you guys have played sports before, and sometimes you don't know things unless a coach has wherewithal to be able to kind of like pinpoint certain things. Those things are becoming much more quantitative these days. It's changing the way we recruit. It's changing the way that we do free agency and even sort of in player performance. Like you can tell sometimes a player might be recovering from injury, like say Ortiz. Like the classic example on the internet of Ortiz, where like he had a wrist injury one time, and if you ask a player how they're doing, they'll say, "Yeah, I'm fine." Right? But what the teams can do is they can just look at the results, right? Like take the Ortiz, he's like a dead pull hitter, right? So his spray chart is very like over here, type of thing. But if you have a bad wrist, maybe you can't get around on it as quick, and suddenly like you're hitting this way, right? And so there's all this information goes in, not just assessing sort of your performance, but also like wellness, so that we kind of know things like, wow, he seems to be losing a step. Something that may not be quite right. Like how do we work with someone to kind of overcome an injury and things like that. So all those things get factored into the analytics process that we do. I know we don't have too much time. Yeah, please.
So for the analytics in the business side,
Yep.
I'm curious if those business analysts are placed on different teams, so they sort of develop their expertise, for example, in sales or marketing. And building on that question, what do you see long-term the future of data analytics field? Do you feel like it will be a skill that's required, for example, marketing specialist?
Yeah, I know that's a good question. I think, yes, it's a very good question. I think, well, I'll take the last part of it. I think you're going to find that like marketing people and other departmental folks are going to need to have a working understanding of data analytics, kind of like everything else. If you think of it like, the way I think of it is this, think of it as like a 10 scale, right? If you're an expert in data analytics, right, you might, like, you're still probably not going to be a DBA level person, right? Because these people just spend their lifetime like formulating algorithms and everything to get all the data that you need, right? So you're probably, say like on the data scale, you might be at 8 and you're really good at it, right? I think in the time, what we're going to wind up doing is we'll raise the bar for people like marketing and other groups that have to work with analytics so that they're at least at like a 3, right? So that because one of the things that tends to happen is if we don't kind of raise the bar with them in a lot of other areas type of thing, is that like too much of the burden falls on the analyst. And the other thing that happens is that the analysts tend not to want to work on those kinds of problems. Like nobody, once you get certain skill level, you don't want to work on like really simple problems, right? You want to continue to grow and new things. So we constantly, I think cybersecurity is a good example of this. We're constantly sort of like almost like re-educating other departments to sort of raise their bar up to a level so that, so that we can provide value add, not sort of hand holding, So I do think groups like marketing are going to develop more of that kind of going forward. I think data analytics is like one of the, I see no stopping data analytics as far as a growth in the field. Like if my kids, when they were in college, I said, oh, go into analytics. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, you can't lose. Like, it's like, I mean, we don't have enough people with these skills, and it's not going anywhere. It's only growing. Because and you think about it too, it's like, even like my example before with cameras, like it's getting more complicated too. Like, how do you do analytics on, like, I don't know, 1,000 frames a second data? Like, you're like, I don't know how to work with video. I don't know how to work with video, right? So there's so much new sources of data. We're all used to thinking of data as like ones and zeros, but basic columnar kind of data. Like, now you have to start thinking about unstructured data. How do you, I just attended something this morning before I came here on, like, how do we more effectively leverage unstructured data so that we can make better business decisions? So how do I use like social media and surveys and web information and comments that you might leave and all these different things? How do we accumulate all that so I can make sort of analytic decisions? So anyways, I think we're very much in our infancy in terms of where data analytics is going to go.